Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at Devex at UNGA 76. It's my absolute pleasure to be here. I'm Michael Igoe, senior reporter with Devex. I'm really excited for this conversation that we're having this morning with Henrietta Fore, who is, of course, the executive director of UNICEF. She's led the agency since 2018. Will be stepping down shortly. So this is, I think, a really fantastic opportunity to hear some parting thoughts, to hear what she's learned along the way, and what she thinks that UNICEF ought to be thinking about going forward. Executive Director Fore, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure. It's great to see you, Michael.
And great to see you too. So we're talking on the morning of the UN Food Systems Summit, the first ever. I think this is considered sort of one of the big highlights of the UN General Assembly this year. And I know that food security and nutrition have been major priorities of yours, particularly as we're sort of thinking about this challenge of building back from the pandemic. How would you characterize both the damage that's been done to global food security and nutrition, particularly for children, and what food systems changes do you want to see coming out of this summit as global leaders convene, and in the longer term in this sort of broader building back agenda?
So, Michael, it's a very interesting question because it's an important one for the world at large. So, UNICEF has issued two reports recently that I think are good. One is the Fed to Fail, and one is No Time to Waste. And in both of them, what we are saying is that children around the world are not getting the nutrition that they need to actually grow up with strong bones and bodies and brains. And as a result, we're really letting them down. So, what could we as a world do about this? And the food systems themselves are the ones that we could tackle. It's a big issue. It's a complicated one, but it's really important for our world. So I think number one is that we all need to recognize that there's a problem. If one out of every three children in the world is not fed properly to be able to survive and grow and thrive, then we should do something about it. We are their parents and their friends and their community helpers. So it means that we have to relook at food systems from the time that they are grown to the time that they enter into the bodies of children. And we can help things all along this road. So, one is that we really could use help in terms of fragile food systems. This has to do with climate change. We have too much scarcity of water. It makes it difficult to grow many of the crops. And as a result, some of the most nutritious foods are sometimes not affordable. We need to also be sure that we are resilient to all the shocks that our world is giving us. We've seen the fires and the droughts and the floods and everything that happens, and they affect food systems, the delivery within urban settings, the delivery in rural settings, and of course, post harvest loss. So, how do we change that as a world? We have to be aware that it's going on. And then when you get to the consumer, if I'm a family in a poor area in a lesser developed countries, am I getting an opportunity to have affordable, accessible, nutritious food? Is the food that's on my shelf, has it been processed too much? Is it nutritious in the form that it's in? We can prevent many of these malnourished scenarios either on wasting and stunting or on obesity if we look at these food systems and tackle them as a world, tackle them both politically and financially.
And let me follow up on that. I think food systems can seem so daunting because they're complex systems, and it's hard to find out sort of hard to figure out where to start, where to affect change. I mean, UNICEF is a big global brand. You're a visible leader. When you think about using your sort of energy and position in an effective way to bring about systems level change, Where do you see the opportunities to do that? Is it with world leaders and sort of top-down policy making? Is it more in through development programs and making food, nutritious food, available and affordable to people? Or is it in behavior change? Where does UNICEF sort of put its energy on this issue?
So, Michael, you've been following this area and you know that actually all of those are needed. So, we try to put our energy where we think it's needed at the time. So, with the Food Systems Summit coming up, that will definitely be the world leaders. And the world leaders need to both acknowledge, but also commit to doing something about our food systems. And we are asking that they double the investments that they are making in food systems. And that's for everyone. That's a minimum of what we need. So that's at the political level, it's at the very high top level. But we also need to involve all of the companies and the individuals who move this food system. So they have to be aware about what they could do to help because everybody can contribute. And corporations should be able to help in the processing of foods, the acquisition, the quality of the foods that they're buying. Farmers should be able to help in the quality of foods that they are growing and what they are selling and when they are selling it and getting it to market so that it's still fresh and and ready for the consumer. But there's also a very household level. I mean, Michael, I think one of the things that we've learned in COVID-19 is that all of us have gone back and under lockdowns and we're cooking more. So, what do we need to know about our own households and the nutrition that we prepare for the children in our households, as well as for the grown-ups in our households? But we particularly focus on children. And so you have to know what is nutritious and that you have the right variety of vegetables and fruits and milk products and protein and cereals so that it builds a nutritious diet.
I want to ask you about one sort of top of mind acute situation, which is in part a food security crisis, but also a broader economic and security crisis in Afghanistan. Can you say a bit about what UNICEF is doing in Afghanistan right now? Our understanding is that UN agencies are going to be asked to play a bigger role in the country. Maybe they already are as sort of the political dynamic shift. And what do you want to see from the international community when it comes to staving off sort of the worst projections of crisis that we're hearing?
So, UNICEF has been in Afghanistan for 70 years. And so we are clear that we are staying and we are going to be working for the Afghan people. And in doing so, our people, both our national staff and our international staff, are working hard in a couple of areas. And I think topmost of mind is the health system, the education systems. So for health, it is the broad health. It includes nutrition. But we have globally a number of children who are not getting their routine immunizations. In a place like Afghanistan now, with all the conflict, it is even more important to be sure that children have access to routine immunizations. Many of our healthcare workers are women. They are nurses, they're healthcare workers, they're doctors. They need to be able to come into the hospitals. They need to be allowed into work. We need to be able to have a way to get them some payments. And we need to be able to have supplies in those hospitals and health centers so that you can give nutritious food to children that are severely malnourished. We have 10 million children right now in Afghanistan. That's an enormous number who are needing humanitarian assistance on a daily basis. And we have 1 million of these children who are at risk of dying this year from severe acute malnutrition. I mean, these are just enormous numbers. So getting that healthcare system up and running is a primary importance. And we need our women healthcare workers to help with that. It is also, as you know, a time of drought in Afghanistan. And so they may have missed some of their, or maybe all of their winter planting season. The winter is coming. It is harsh in Afghanistan, so we will also need to be sure that on the health side, that there's enough warm clothing to be able to keep children from being too cold and freezing. And then the secondary that's very important to us as UNICEF is education. We want to keep the schools open, but this is a massive challenge. So we need the school teachers to be able to come back to schools. We need to be sure that boys and girls are returning to school. Primary school in some of the provinces has started, and both little boys and little girls are heading off to school, which is important. And female teachers are teaching in the school. In other provinces, that's not true. And in many of the provinces, they are questioning whether or not girls who are in secondary school can return to school. So we are working hard on these areas. We know that school is so important. School has started, and it is important at every age, but particularly when you're just starting school. So we want to be sure that there is good health in Afghanistan and good education programs in Afghanistan.
And where do you, thinking about the role of the international community on this, where do you sort of draw the line, this heavily debated line between assistance that gets to people, that gets children in schools, that ensures that that people have enough to eat, and assistance that in some way lends an endorsement or some sort of tacit approval of the government of the Taliban? How do you sort of navigate that very difficult dilemma that the aid community seems to be grappling with right now?
So, for many of us who've worked in Afghanistan for decades, we have been around through the changes of governments, and so there are working relationships in the many of the provinces. And these working relationships, it's a very decentralized government system. They have been working 2 months ago, they are working now. So we have individuals that we are talking to, that we can make systems continue in many of the provinces, because without the United Nations, without the humanitarian community and the nonprofit, the civil society players, there's no way to get assistance to the people. I mean, there are 18 million people who need daily humanitarian assistance. So the line, as you call it, often draws between humanitarian and development work. But at UNICEF, we are one of the UN agencies that has a dual mandate, both humanitarian and development. So we know that you need education on the first day, and you need education 5 years later. You need water on the first day, and you need it 5 days later. You need a health system on your first day and 5 days later. So right now, we are just doing the lifeline of humanitarian assistance, and the recent donor conference, there are pledges now on the humanitarian side. So our community, I think everyone wants to help save lives. And this is the moment in which Afghanistan and the Afghan people need our help.
I think it's remarkable that we've been discussing these enormous challenges and not yet even sort of waded into the waters of ending the COVID-19 pandemic and UNICEF's role there. It really, to me, just drives home how many different fronts organizations like UNICEF are operating on right now, and of course that the UN General Assembly is having to confront and to deal with. But let's sort of zero in on COVID-19 and the immunization challenge. UNICEF has worked in immunization for decades, and you know what a good vaccination system looks like. But my understanding is that vaccinating children, sort of routine vaccinations for children, is a very different thing than sort of standing up a universal vaccination program for COVID, which is adults and everybody in a given country. So we have this program, COVAX. It's repeatedly sort of scaling back its projections for the number of vaccines that it's going to be able to deliver this year and pushing them into next year. What's your impression? Does the world need a completely new system for delivering vaccines to people in lower income countries when something like a global pandemic emerges?
Well, I'm a big believer in building on what you have in the world because it's faster. And what COVID-19 has taught all of us is that we need speed and we need scale. So, while the routine immunization system was put in place for children, and particularly for children under 5 to get their vaccinations, it is a useful system since it reaches half of the world's children to build on. And thus, UNICEF's role is that we are procuring vaccines, we are transporting them. We are bringing them into country and working with the ministries of health and the countries for their own readiness. And so that means moving them along the cold chain. We have a good cold chain now that goes even into the rural areas because vaccines do need to be kept at certain temperatures. And with the new COVID vaccines, some of them are even in the ultra cold chain. So we have moved into that system. And we also are training healthcare workers. And this is a very important part, Michael, because not every vaccine works in the same way, and it does not have the same dosage requirements. So it's very important with all of the vaccines arriving that there's good training for the local healthcare workers. And then you have to have communication to the people. People have to want to get vaccinated. They have to understand why. And with the breakdowns in transportation systems in many of the lesser developed countries, it's been difficult for families to bring their children into the clinics because there's been no way to get there. They used to take a bus, but it's not running. So I think all of that is something that we are trying to adjust to within a country to make sure that there are enough healthcare workers. So many of the healthcare workers who've been doing polio vaccinations, we have transferred them into the COVID vaccine so that they're retraining. We do this with all of our partners. And that's been very important because you can't just stand up a healthcare worker workforce overnight. And you need to be sure that there's a hygienic way to move vaccines through a country. So do we need a new system? I would improve upon the systems that we have. And I would get all of these systems to work together in a much better way for public and private entities to work together. Vaccines were developed by private companies. And so, how we look at things like insurance and liabilities is we have to be able as a world to make it simple, to make it quick and straightforward, so that there is enough assurance to a private company to manufacture the vaccines, enough assurance that a government knows that they are safe, and that people, especially in a family, you know that it will be safe for yourselves and for your children.
Great. You're shortly stepping away from this role. I'm sure that you have mixed feelings about that, particularly at a time when there is so much need out there. But I wondered if you might share some words of advice to your successor. What have you learned that you would pass on about the role that UNICEF can and should play in tackling these challenges?
Well, one is that immediately jumps to mind is to listen to the young people themselves. They're always a step ahead. They're thinking about the future and what they dream about and what they want to do. And one of the things that they are telling us is that they want a modern education and they want to learn some life skills and job skills when they're in secondary school so that they can see life in the future. So I'm hoping that we can have my successor very strongly supporting connecting every school in the world to the internet, every learner and every teacher to learning, so that there becomes a level playing field, so that every child in this next generation has basic digital skills and access to education. If you get an education, it is the best ladder out of poverty. It's a chance to create something in your own communities and in the world to come. So look ahead to what might be. and look for innovations that can change how you see the world. I mean, for connecting every school, we're looking at lower satellites and fiber optic cables. We're also looking at artificial intelligence because children with disabilities will need them. But there are lots and lots of innovations around us, new ways to filter water, new ways to create vaccines, new ways to think about protection services and mental health, a big new area for us to learn about, do research, and particularly talk to the young people, see what they're thinking and why they're thinking it, and how we can open up opportunities for them.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Executive Director Fore. Wish you and your family all the best, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Michael.